Thank you, Jill, for organizing this incredible event here today. And I'm glad to be part of it all the way from South Africa. But as you can tell, my accent is still American. You can take the boy out of America, but you can't take America out of the boy. So here I am. And I'm very grateful to be here with you, coming from the holiest day of the year on the Jewish calendar, known as Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And I was thinking, what would be the appropriate topic of discussion to share? And I thought nothing less than what you call today, this day of unity and humanity, of interfaith celebration. And I thought I'd share some Jewish perspectives on that. So, first of all, it's just incredible to be with this wonderful group of people you've gathered and everyone else who's joining from around the world to be part of this. I think in today's day and age, we need a lot more of this cultural awareness and synthesis. And I'm privileged to be sharing with you that Jewish perspective. So I thought I would share a little bit of an overview, in a sense, of some elements of Jewish culture that would help you understand what what the Jewish culture is like. So I chose 6 topics, if I can only even get to all 6 of them. The 6 topics being kosher, Shabbos, holidays, prayer, birth, and end of life. But I don't know if we'll get to all of these. But in the meantime, first I thought it's important we address this topic even in general about unity and humanity, because it's just so important that we better understand each other and to just get along better in society. It's so necessary considering the state of affairs in the world today. So that's the first thing that I think is so important. And Jill, we see your passion for this shining through in everything you've done to create this day of cultural awareness and interfaith celebration. Love that terminology. And the first and obvious reason to emphasize for today is that we understand and appreciate each other better when we know that we're not just different people walking in a world together, but rather when we understand a little bit and appreciate of one another's values and morals and what makes us tick. I think that just puts us in a much better setting in this world. And, besides for that, Judaism itself gives several insights that make this whole idea of cultural awareness and interfaith appreciation and understanding particularly important to me. You see, in Judaism, we believe that our cultural distinctions are actually part of the divine plan. God wanted humanity to form into distinct cultural groupings. Even within Jewish society that I'm representing here today, we have many different expressions of Jewish culture. We have so many different streams and ways of practicing Judaism. I would say, in general, if you want to put into a nutshell, all of society, 7-8 billion of us, every single person is unique. Every single person is indispensable to the divine plan for this world. And when we could appreciate the distinct and unique role that we each play, and that we were all born originals. Nobody has to die a copy of anyone else. Everyone else is taken. So by definition, we realize that not only is each person uniquely distinct and different, but to realize we have our cultural distinctions. And that's God's desire that humans spread across the globe to share and to be shining superstars that we all are by sharing each other what we each uniquely have, and we could all share with the world. And I think that all boils down ultimately into the divine human core, that we're all created in that divine image. And in that sense, we're not different. We're all unique. In fact, Judaism says, the Bible says, I'm sure everyone believes, we're all created in the divine image. Well, I look here at this robust group. We all have different images. We all have different looks and features. So what's the divine image? And that's our soul. And we're all created in that divine image. So there's a sense among Jews that learning about and respecting other people's cultures and having that tolerance and appreciation for one another, that actually shows respect for God's plan that humanity develop into these cultural distinctions that we all are. In fact, what comes to my mind is there's a story in the Talmud about a rabbi, a great rabbi. And this rabbi once encountered a fellow who he criticized this man for being ugly. And of course, it seems quite strange that a rabbi is going to comment on a person's facial features. So the truth is, the commentaries say he wasn't talking about his external representation, but rather internally, this person was ugly, his characteristics, his personality. But be it as it may, what stands out to me more was the response of that person. Because this person said, "You're calling me ugly. Well, why don't you go to the craftsman who made me and tell him how ugly is this vessel that you made?" In other words, I think when we fail to respect an element of creation, whether it's a person or a culture or anything else, it's not just an affront to that thing, but it's also a disrespect to God. God willed this facet of life into being. God did not create us all looking the same, and we don't have to all think the same. We all have different ways of seeing things. And Jill, it's to your credit that you bring it all together here today. And perhaps there's a deeper layer even of understanding of this story. Because this man's reply to the rabbi, go to the craftsman and look at me from his perspective, from the divine perspective. If you gaze at me with the perspective of the divine, you're going to notice my inherent beauty, that I am also indispensable for this world. Every person who's created matters. So what seemed ugly or dissonant will just be different. When we see things from God's perspective, the ugly thing is no longer ugly. Every single person and every single culture has a role to play. So that's a point that came to my mind. Another point is that Judaism believes that it's our job to actually partner with God in creating His world, which means that it's our job to work together to better our world until it reflects God's ultimate vision. And what this practically means is that we need to work together in mutual respect to make the world a more loving, a more peaceful place, which, Jill, this is exactly what you're achieving here today. If we all treat each other's needs with the same enthusiasm that we apply to our own needs, then no doubt the world would quickly become a happier, a healthier, and a more peaceful, loving place to live in. And so I think it's in this context that we need to work to build bridges between cultures so that we can respect the distinctions, the differences that make us unique, and learn from each other, because there is so much that we could learn from one another. In Ethics of Our Fathers, which is a great work of Jewish teachings, it says, who is a wise person? One who learns from everyone. There's something we can learn from every single person, especially from someone who's different than myself. So I'm looking forward to learn from every single one of the presenters today, and I feel privileged that you gave me the opportunity to speak first. Even as we appreciate the similarities that make us the same, I think there's so much that we could gain from each other's differences. And from this perspective, like I intend to share with you a little bit about Jewish observance. So when the next time you encounter a Jewish person, you just have a more sensitive understanding and appreciation of the basics. So I think it's so important because the human, in a sense, we're this amalgam of body and soul, every one of us. And therefore, understanding our spiritual needs, we could perhaps be more in tune with each other's physical needs, and hopefully the world could be a more peaceful place where we all get along with one another and just have a little bit more appreciation and understanding of one another. So that's why I chose these topics, because kosher, every time you might break bread with a fellow Jew, you want the Jewish person, if they're observant, if they're religious, even an irreligious Jew knows about kosher. So it's important that I share with you a little bit about that. Shabbos, or Shabbat, depending how you want to pronounce it, is our day of rest. I thought I'd share with you a few insight about that and our Jewish holidays, a little bit about prayer, and if we could get to some ideas about the role of a rabbi. They say is hatch, match, and dispatch. So I thought I'd cover all those areas and aspects if we have time for them. But the most important thing, I think, in general, about all cultures is it's important to ask. There's no way that we could become fully competent in any culture or any area of life in a single session. And there's no doubt that in today's short presentation I'm going to give you, we're not going to have enough time to touch on everything about Judaism, or even on these points that I want to highlight. It's impossible to cover everything. Even with these specific areas, I don't think we're going to, it's just going to be very basic. So no matter how comprehensive a session might be, it just paints a picture in these broad strokes. But most important, I think, is that if you have questions and we wonder about the differences of other cultures, best thing to do is ask questions. So I open the floor to anyone who has questions. Feel free to put them in the chat box or in the Q&A. I don't know which one's better, whichever one. And I'm happy to take your questions at the end of my presentation. Jill, you'll tell me when my time is up. Unfortunately, sometimes I have a tendency to keep on talking and talking. So just tell me it's time to wrap it up, and I'll do so obligingly, no doubt. And just thought that these are some topics that I'll talk about. So let's launch right in. A little joke comes to my mind of a Jew from a small town comes back one day from a big city that he went to visit. So somebody asks him, tell me about your visit to the big city. He says, well, I went to the big city, and there I met a Jew who had grown up very religious, and he knew so much of Jewish law and everything you ever wonder about Jewish teachings, the Bible, the Talmud, you name it. And he says, then I met another Jew who was an atheist, and I met a Jew who owned a large, big company with many employees, and I met a Jew who was very poor, and I met a Jew who was a communist, and I met a Jew who was a capitalist, and I met a Jew who was this, that, the other. So the other fellow asks him, he says, I don't understand you. We have all these types of Jews in our town too. So the guy says, no, you don't understand. This is all the same Jew. The same Jew is all of those. So the first thought that comes to my mind in that sense is you may have encountered one type of Jew or another type of Jew. There are so many of us. We're so few in the world, but at the same time, we all come in different colors and in different personalities and different levels of observance. So the first thing to know is that, and I would imagine the same applies to any other religion that is being represented here today or any other faith. It's the way it goes, and that's why it's important to ask, and that's the only way we can actually learn. In Judaism, we believe that the only bad question is the question that isn't asked. Asking is a very important part. Another teaching from ethics of our fathers is one who's ashamed doesn't learn. We can't learn when we're embarrassed. In fact, the very opening statement in the book of Jewish law, which interesting is called a set table. And the Hebrew word for Jewish law is called halacha, which also means to walk, because wherever we go, this body of Jewish law guides a Jew on how to live their life. And it says there that we cannot be embarrassed of people who mock us. So the very basic of one who's ashamed doesn't learn is basically telling us that if we're embarrassed to ask questions because we fear somebody's going to make fun, we feel we might be humiliated or insulted by asking, we're just going to remain ignorant. So the best thing to do is, whatever I don't know about, let me ask. And it's important that we do ask these questions, because when we ask, that's the way we learn. And knowing that we can't cover all of Judaism in one single session here today, and knowing that no doubt whatever I say today is certainly going to trigger more questions. So I'm stating straight up. And Jill, if you want to share my details afterwards, if anyone wants to ask me questions, or certainly they could go into a reputable website online, such as our organization, Chabad.org, where you can find answers to so many of your questions about Jewish culture, about the Jewish religion in general. And no doubt you'll find a lot of answers to your questions there. So let me launch into the first topic I thought about talking about, and that is kosher. Are you familiar with kosher? Oh, somebody's asking to tell us about today's holiday. So actually, yesterday was a Jewish holiday. Yesterday's holiday was called Yom Kippur. It's a day of Day of Atonement. And I'm going to get to that in a moment, because I put that in my presentation, I think as the third section. So we'll get to that in a moment. Okay. Was there another question that popped up on the screen? I'll take a look at all of the questions as they come forward. And thank you for your point about my energy. I appreciate that. It's good to have good energy. But I'll look at the questions after I talk about each topic that I wanted to discuss, just so that I could focus on the particular topic that's going on. I thought it's always good to begin with food, because firstly, in Jewish culture, food is always present, except for yesterday's holiday. That was a fast day. We didn't eat for 25 hours, no food, no drink. So otherwise, generally speaking, food is something that probably connects and bonds a lot of people. So I think that's worthwhile to talk about the kosher diet. Now, have you ever encountered, I wonder, if you ever met with other Jewish people who are particular about the food items. Now, besides for cultural Jewish food, there are actually laws related to how we eat, what we eat, etc. So I think it's important that I just address that. Some background about kosher, why this diet is important to any Jew. What does kosher even mean? The word kosher literally means fit. So you might hear the word kosher in other contexts where people talk about behavior. Is it befitting behavior? That's also relative to the word kosher. But generally, when it comes to food, what does it mean that food is kosher? Some people think it means it's blessed by a rabbi. No, it might be supervised by a rabbi or even anyone who's familiar with the laws of kosher dietary specifications. So let's talk about that. Foods that are prepared in accordance with many and intricate laws within Judaism that cover every food category and every aspect of its preparation. So if it's kosher, then it's fit for consumption. That means I could eat it only if it's kosher. That could either be a rabbi supervising the production of the food to ensure that it's prepared in accordance with the laws of Judaism, obviously being a large part of humans' daily experience. We all like to eat. So our choice of what to eat and when to eat is oftentimes governed by impulse. And that's a major distinction between an animal's behavior and a human's behavior. If we crave a burger and I just want to eat the burger now, if I want vegetables, whatever I want to eat it. And if we can't have what we want, I'm going to be disappointed and I might be grumpy and grouchy. And well, Judaism teaches that our mind has to control our heart, our intellect to control our emotions. So we have to govern our impulses rather than being governed by them. And this is one reason why the Bible, Torah, legislated an entire set of laws that pertain to the whole gamut of the food that we eat. And the goal is to infuse this otherwise animalistic experience with mindfulness. So one famous example of a kosher directive is the Jewish tradition that tells us to eat bacon and shellfish. You might be familiar with that. But to get a little bit more specific, maybe meat and chicken actually have to be slaughtered and prepared in a very specific manner. And these are just a few examples. But the common denominator by all these laws is that they teach us and empower us to forge the strength and discipline to control our emotions rather than being controlled by them. And it's a very, very important part of the Jewish culture. We all know that our material desires are by nature very potent. And that's, obviously our material desires precede our intellect. Think about it. Our physical pleasures are ingrained into our natures from the beginning of life. We grow up with these primal tendencies and they influence us. The extent of our intellect, which is a faculty that is central to the purpose of our existence, but it's something that without food, without our basic primal needs, we can't survive. So obviously we need those, but we also need to govern, we need to control and discipline that within ourselves. Another reason is that our material desires are strengthened by us being in a material environment. We're constantly, we have our physical needs, whether it's for our gadgets, whether it's for food. And the more we capitulate or concede to our physical material desires, the more they control us. And on the other hand, our intellect is a spiritual entity of the spiritual world, and it feels like a stranger in our coarse material environment. Right? It finds no assistance from the material physical environment in which we reside. Everything is said to say stacked against it. So it's to be expected that our material desires might weaken and overpower our intellect, both because the material desire precedes the intellect and because they are assisted by the environment in which we live, which is very materialistic. And that's why Jewish law requires that we strengthen our intellect and weaken our material desires, which perhaps goes back to the question about this holiday that we just observed. That was a 25-hour fast. right? We are given laws within Judaism, certain times that we fast, or we have laws that forbid us from just eating any foods, and not just regarding food. Think about it. Every sexual act is controlled within Jewish law. We have laws that dictate when we pray, and that we give part of our income to charity and other acts of kindness. It's all in order to weaken the power of our primal desires and to focus that our mind will control our desires. You could say it's mind over matter. If you don't mind, it doesn't matter. So this is something, in fact, in the Bible it says, sanctify yourself and you will be holy. And our sages long ago in the Talmud, which is the basic work of the of commentary on the Bible, tells us sanctify yourself. That refers to when you follow God's command, you will be holy, meaning that through following God's commandments, the power of our material desires are weakened and the influence of the intellect, which for which we're created, is strengthened. So it's not about depriving ourselves from our physical desires. We're allowed to eat and we're allowed to have good food, and there's plenty of delicious kosher food. I'm sure you've seen plenty of overweight Jews. I myself am struggling with my own weight and got to work on it. It's not that you can't eat, but it's about controlling the way we eat. In fact, Judaism advocates bringing sanctity to activities that are otherwise mundane. So a healthy and balanced diet, in my mind, is a cookie in both hands. Not just kidding. It's critical to the health and well-being of our bodies, is having a spiritual well-being as well, having that in check. So it's about elevating our eating experience to something that's sacred, something that's sublime. And the framework of a kosher diet, it transforms our meal into a holy platform that serves God, that I'm not just serving myself. It's not narcissistic when I'm eating. When we choose to eat only those dishes that are supported by the kosher diet, then our mundane meal becomes a holy experience because it allows God into this important area of human life. So thereby, we inject holiness into what would otherwise be a mundane experience. So let me just share a few thoughts about that, and I'll take your questions here. Number one, here's a basic overview of the laws of kosher, and I'll get right on to your questions. First thing is that certain animals, birds, fish, and insects, or their derivatives, are not allowed to be consumed. Okay, so that's just putting it basically out there. Animals and birds that may be consumed, they have to be prepared in a very specific manner. And so that is the second point about kosher food. Number three, we don't eat milk and meat together. Right? It may sound like only a few laws, but within each of these laws, there's a host of a lot of details within this that I don't have the time to go into each of the intricate details. But the point that I make is that obviously everything we do should be governed by our intellect and infusing it with the spirituality. In fact, before we even eat, what we do is we say a blessing on the food. So we become mindful before we're eating, who provided me with all my needs? And I think it's important to have that mindfulness before we partake of the physical, before we indulge. Another way of looking at it is, if I'm uplifting the food by saying a blessing, and I realize that I'm not just eating to indulge and have my own, just for my own pleasure and self animalistic needs, but rather because I need that energy to fulfill my divine purpose, my mission in this world, well, I'm elevating the food to a higher purpose. Same could be said to why I'm exercising. I go to the gym because I need to be healthy in order to fulfill the divine purpose that God put me into this world. Of course, there's a lot more to kosher than I've shared with you here, but that's just a short example. At the end of the day, when you, with kosher food, there's a lot of other laws, and I'm happy to take any questions in that regard right now. So I'm going to just take a look at the Q&A and then at the chat and see what questions have come through. Jill, how do you want to do with questions? Do you want to read them aloud, or should I just read them and respond?
You can go ahead and take a look at them and respond.
Okay, great. So Cameron, thank you for your you wrote, you love my energy. Thank you. Thanks for pointing out that we should embrace our unique cultures. Indeed. In your understanding, does God intend to eventually unify mankind under one spiritual understanding or government, or is the variety of mankind and religious ideas meant to be maintained? I think that diversity is part of the intention. I don't know for certain. I think there's going to be a conglomeration, a kind of synthesis of both, because in the great prophets and scriptures, it does talk about a time when all the world will be united and recognizing one God, creator of heaven and earth, which monotheism is a basic tenet of Jewish faith. So I think it would be a synthesis of these two ideas. On the one hand, where everyone would come to acknowledge or recognize one God, creator of all of heaven and earth, but at the same time, I think that diversity is something that's intended in order for us to appreciate one another. Angels might be single and the same, but that's part of the beauty and diversity of humanity, is that each of us is unique and created in our own beautiful, indispensable way to this world. So thank you for that, Cameron. The next question I see here from Van, and that is, with Yom Kippur originally having been directly tied to ceremonial activities in the temple in Jerusalem, how does Judaism today generally regard the need for a proper temple complex in order to observe this day? That is a great question. And while we no longer have our temple, which was destroyed 1,950 something years ago, the year 54 years ago, the year 70 of the Common Era, today first of all, every synagogue is a mini temple, and secondly, each person, Jew, Gentile, wherever we are in the world, we create our own mini temple. We bring God's presence to wherever we are in the world. God always has a place for us, and we always have to feel God's presence wherever we are. So obviously, without the temple, we no longer have the same ritual and ceremonial practices as were done in the times of the temple, but we certainly read about it, and we try to emulate it and replicate it in certain ways. So to give you just two examples, firstly, today prayer takes the place of sacrifice. But the Hebrew word for sacrifice is karban. And many words in Hebrew have multiple meanings. So the etymology of karban is karav, which means to come close. And in my mind, I developed this thought that if I want to come close to someone, yesterday my wife and I celebrated our 17th wedding anniversary. But from 18 years ago when I met her, in order for us to cultivate our relationship, in order for us to go on dates, I had to sacrifice time from my studies, from work, whatever it was. So it requires sacrifice to cultivate a relationship. Whether it's in work or family, you have to sacrifice, just like the sacrifice in the temple. The whole purpose of a sacrifice was that I'm going to sacrifice my animals, which probably then being a more agricultural world, it's not something we could relate to as much today, but that was a major currency of the time, 2 to 3,000 years ago. So people sacrificed their animal to come closer to God. And in that sense, I think we could sacrifice our animalistic tendencies to come closer. But that's not the ultimate relationship. That is just cultivating relationship. When you sacrifice, you get closer, whether it's sacrificing time, money, beliefs, whatever it might be. The ultimate relationship is actually that is an intimate relationship. And that requires a lot more than sacrifice. It's an inextricable bond that comes from the next level after you've sacrificed and gotten close to each other. Only a husband and wife can appreciate the intimacy of this inseparable and inextricable relationship that they have. And that's the ultimate relationship every human being can have with God. And on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, was the one day a year where the high priest back in the times of the temple would enter the Holy of Holies, the holiest space and the holiest day, by who was considered the holiest person, took place on that day. And the truth is, this is the holiest moment for every single one of us. Every moment is precious, and we have to really, really, really tap into every moment that we have. So I hope that answers your question. I see another question from, I hope I don't mispronounce your name, Caden, with regards to disciplining the appetite, the passions under reason, or the intellect. Do you have restrictions on media digital consumption? I know some Jews and Orthodox Christians refrain from technology on their Sabbath. If so, how does this better unify your community? That's a great question. And the answer to that is absolutely yes. First of all, in general, not only about the Sabbath. So yes, for 24 or 25 hours, every Friday from sunset until the stars are out on Saturday, we don't use any technology. If I need a light on in my room, I'll turn it on before the Sabbath begins, or I'll have a timer switch to ensure that any technology, we don't cook food. It's actually a biblical commandment not to light any fires on the Sabbath. I won't go into all the laws of the Sabbath, although that was my next topic, Shabbos, as we pronounce it in our Ashkenazic, or originally from European extraction. So that's the way we pronounce it. There's different ways we pronounce Hebrew words. And we don't use any technology in those days in the sense of activating them for usage. So, firstly, answering your question, whether it comes to food or any of the passions and desires, um, including technology, I won't use my phone or computer. In fact, Jill was sending me messages last week on the holiday, probably not realizing that it took me, 48 hours, or rather, last week was a whole weekend. It started Wednesday evening, and it ended on Saturday night because we had 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, which was 48-hour holiday, and went straight into the Sabbath. So there you had 72 hours of no digital involvement, and that's certainly a blessing from on high. I think there's a reason why we call these cell phones, because we sometimes are like in a cell, so glued to them, myself included. So it's good to have that detox once a week, and I encourage everyone to somehow or other inculcate that in your own life. It's a good way to go. So I hope that answers your question. Next question from Cecil in Texas. We're from Texas as a child. I don't know why, but we never ate milk and meat together. Is there a health reason for that? So that's a great question, Cecil. And I've seen some recent articles saying that there are some health benefits to them. I don't know what those health benefits are or aren't. But the reason we observe it as religious practicing Jews is irregardless of the health benefits that there are. And there certainly are, as I saw some scientific articles discussing the health benefits of them, which I don't remember offhand what they are. But those are side benefits. They're fringe benefits. If you might notice, some Orthodox Jews, we have these little spaghetti strings coming out of our the side of our pants. These are things that remind us. It's a biblical commandment to be reminded about the commandments all the time. So we wear a garment called tzitzit, and so it was only a little joke. I was talking about the fringe benefits. If there are benefits, that's wonderful, but we do it strictly because God says so, and it's a biblical commandment, and that's why we observe it. The next question, thank you for Matt about my temperament. I appreciate that. Next, I like the idea of cooking in each hand. Thank you. Next one, I love the idea of injecting holiness into the mundane. Absolutely, we all must do that wherever we can. I understand that regarding sea life, we should not eat anything without fins. Yes, when it comes to, I didn't get into all the details of it, but if you want, we could certainly look at a few aspects of that, of what defines a kosher fish. When it comes to meat, it has to be an animal that chews its cud, has split hooves, and is also slaughtered in a particular way. And therefore, kosher meat, for example, would have certain packaging, and it has to be, the packaging has to be completely sealed until until I buy it and open it up. I might be on a plane. If you ever see Jewish passengers on an airplane are going to get served the kosher meal, just like vegetarian passengers or halal Muslim passengers are going to get their halal meal. And I'm sure there's many others out there of different options that the airlines offer. And you'll notice that when it comes to kosher and possibly the others, possibly for non-contamination or whatever other reasons it might be. But when it comes to kosher meat, there's a specific law. And I have to tell you an incredible story. A friend of mine was flying once on a plane. He was actually quite hungry. His meal came. And when his meal came, he realized before we eat, part of Jewish law requires we actually have to wash our hands in a ritual manner, as was done in our ancient temple. So we go to a sink to wash. And of course, he has to go across his fellow passengers. And he goes to wash his hands. And then he realized, you remember, there's a Jewish law that says when you have a kosher meat, again, this law doesn't pertain to my own home, because in my home, I'm only bringing kosher meat. But when I'm in an environment where there might be other meat around that's not necessarily kosher, once the packaging has been opened and it hasn't been supervised, we don't eat it, because it has to be monitored to make sure that it's kosher meat. My friend says he comes back to his place and he remembered that law, and he decided not to eat his sandwich. The guy next to him says, "Hey, buddy, why aren't you eating your sandwich?" He says, "No, I'm not hungry." And the guy's like, "No, I saw you salivating there. I know you're hungry." He says, "No, I'm not in the mood." The guy says, "Tell me why you're not eating." He says, "Well, it might sound peculiar and strange to you, but there is a Jewish law that dictates that if the food hasn't been supervised, if it's regarding kosher meat and the sealed packaging has been broken, then I can't eat it if that's the case." The guy says, "Your laws are unbelievable, because I always wondered what these kosher meals that are served earlier are about. And I saw you got like a meat sandwich and I got a meat sandwich. So I decided, let me see what the kosher meat sandwich is like. So while you left your seat, I quickly tasted your meat and it tasted good. I wanted some more. Then I realized you're going to come back to your seat and there won't be meat. So I put my meat into yours. And he said, you see, I understand now why Jewish law requires this. So there are certain laws within Judaism, whether we understand them or not, they're for good reason and they're for good purpose. So back to your question about sea life, we only eat fish that have fins and scales. There's plenty of delicious fish, from salmon to sea bass to yellowtail to you name it. There's plenty of good fish that have fins and scales. So no, we won't eat prawn or lobster or any other shellfish and many other, seafood that if they don't have fins and scales, we can't eat them. Of course, they also have to be prepared in a kosher kitchen, because if there might be other utensils that have been used to prepare food that isn't kosher, we can't eat them. So just thanks for that question. I hope that clarifies what you asked. Next, I see it from Jeff. Mind over matter. If you don't mind, it doesn't matter, is an elegant way to explain how we know whether we're in the right mindset towards something physical. Absolutely. Jill, do you want me to go on to the next topics, or have I overused my time already?
I would love you to, but unfortunately we've gone over time.
Okay.
Though I was thinking, I think there's 90 people here right now who would probably really like to hear what else you have to say. So just out of curiosity, would you be willing to maybe come back again here soon if I scheduled something so that we could hear the rest of your presentation?
Sure, we could do this anytime. Or as I said, there's plenty available online, and I figured better to over prepare, and I don't get to everything than to under prepare. So that's what I did, and I hope it went over well.
That was great. Thank you so much. I mean,
Pleasure.
really wonderful. Thank you.
I can't wait to hear what everyone else, what the other presenters have to share as well. Although I am a paramedic, so if any emergencies come through, I'm on duty tonight, then I might have to depart in that case. But I'll
Okay.
stay tuned and hope that we don't get any emergencies to pull me away.
Thank you.